We're rolling. Hi, this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog UN Dispatch. I'm talking today with Lisa Jackson, the filmmaker and director of the new documentary out on HBO this week called The Greatest Silence, Rape in the Congo. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
First, congratulations on the film. It's sort of, there's a lot of buzz surrounding it. A sort of front page style section in the Washington Post today, or this week at least.
Yeah, there's a lot of ink.
There's a lot of buzz around it. It won an award at Sundance, but it's on sort of a pretty dark and troubling topic on sexual violence that's sort of manifested itself pretty terribly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I wanted to ask you, how did you get sort of the idea or inspiration to make this film?
It was came from a lot of areas. I think when you see the film, you get a little bit of my backstory and a little of my motivation. But you never hear about modern war from the point of view of women and girls. And especially since World War I, it's the civilian population that gets affected more than the military population. But that voice, that angle on war has always been invisible. And also when you talk about war, you talk about the number of casualties, but you don't talk about the walking dead, who are the women and girls who suffer rape. And rape and war have been conjoined since there was war and women. But what is happening in the Congo is particularly heinous, and it gets very little media coverage for reasons maybe we can go into later. But I had a friend who was actually working for the UN mission in the Congo, and she said, if you want a good place to start this film, which was kind of going to be a survey film about women and girls in conflict, you should come here. So she was about to leave her post, so I cashed in frequent flyer miles and put my camera in a backpack and flew to Kinshasa in the west, and then got UN credentials and ended up in eastern Congo, where this conflict has been raging now for 10 years, and which is pretty literally hell on earth for women and girls. So once I got there, I realized that people weren't telling the story and these women weren't being heard, so I stuck around and started filming.
But the numbers are staggering. You said people don't realize this, but the conflict in the DRC, took some sort of 4 million lives. Where it still rages in the east, which is sort of still a hot conflict zone, as you very well know. You see sort of hundreds of thousands of women and girls who've been sort of the victims of sexual violence there. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean the numbers around what's been happening in the Congo are just they make your mind freeze. The conflict has been going on for about 10 years, and Congo is an incredibly rich country in terms of its mineral and natural resources, and it's surrounded by 8 other African countries, all of whom want a piece of it. So you can really say that the conflict started in '95, about the time of the Rwandan genocide, when literally hundreds of thousands of Hutu genocidaires came across the border into Congo, and about between 10 and 30,000 of them never left. So in that 10 years, the last estimate that I heard from the International Rescue Committee was 5.4 million people have died. And the reported rapes in one province in 1 year were 45,000. And in this country, 1 in 10 women reports a rape. In the DRC, it's got to be 1 in 20. So 250,000 women and girls, 500,000 women and girls. But the point is that it's a systematic rape. It's part of the conflict. It's truly a weapon of war where women and girls are targeted. The rapes are unbelievably brutal. There are incredible mutilations, and as a result, the woman is often cast out from her family, from her village, is left to care for multiple children who then become, conscripted into militias or end up working in the illegal mines in the east. It's really sort of a Holocaust in slow motion, and one that I don't quite understand why the first world hasn't embraced. We're talking 10 times the number of fatalities that have been suffered in Darfur. So I have my own theories about why it's not being reported.
Well, I mean, why is it? We hear, I think I am, probably guilty of sort of focusing more, say, on Darfur, where you have, the genocide word buzzing around, than on the DRC, which is, arguably a more intractable and a more sort of devastating conflict. I mean, why is that? I mean, why sort of is the media at large sort of not paying sort of quite as much attention, would you say, to the DRC?
Yeah. Well, it's not a particularly media-friendly war because there's no clear good guy or bad guy. And I think a lot of Western media outlets see it as this kind of internecine African thing with all of these countries involved. I mean, they call it Africa's World War, but I think the main thing that people need to understand is that it's a resource war, pure and simple, and that what is going on in the East is about plundering these specific minerals that Congo has more than any other place in the world. Minerals like cassiterite, tin. They make this kind of tin that is particularly perfect for soldering, and a mineral called coltan, Coltan, which I mentioned coltan, and people go, "What's that?" If you own a laptop computer, a remote control, a PlayStation, a cell phone, you have coltan. You possess coltan. You cannot make a capacitor without coltan. And Eastern Congo has 80% of the world's reserves. So I think this is very much a war that's being fought for those resources, that it's an economic war, and that there are huge international, multinational companies that are aiding the exploitation, using the militias, particularly from Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, to create the kind of chaos that they need to rape the country and take out these minerals. I mean, for instance, Rwanda 3 years ago exported over 2 million tons of coltan, but coltan does not exist within the borders of Rwanda. A lot of the coltan is taken out, and it also exists in Australia and Chile, and it'll be taken out of the Congo and labeled as having been originated in Australia. But I think that's the source of it all, and one of the reasons that it's not reported, because I think we're all complicit. I think we're all complicit. Blood coltan, I hope, will be a huge issue going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the example you use of Rwanda is one I've heard before. Where I just want to emphasize that point. Rwanda, there's no coltan in Rwanda, yet Rwanda is one of the world's largest exporters of coltan. Precisely because it's sort of a belligerent and is sponsoring belligerents in the war in Eastern Congo, and sort of for a while, I believe it was last May, you were embedded with MONUC, the UN peacekeeping force there, and there are some interesting scenes, I think, in your movie that almost sort of speak to contradictory roles and perceptions of MONUC in Eastern Congo. On the one hand, sort of you're riding along with a Pakistani battalion, and there are sort of children cheering on the side of the road and shouting MONUC joyfully. But yet there's this one scene where MONUC is witnessing Congolese National Army troops sort of extorting local villagers. What's your impression of sort of the role and the success or failures of MONUC in Eastern Congo?
It's a no-win situation. People talk about the fact that the peacekeeping force in Congo is the largest in the world. There's 17,000 peacekeepers in Eastern Congo. And this is a country, you have to understand, that it literally is the size of the U.S. east of the Mississippi. It's the size of Western Europe. And when you think about 17,000 peacekeepers trying to maintain control in this area, compared to, say, Kosovo, where in the former Yugoslavia, where during that conflict there were 60,000 peacekeepers in an area the size of Delaware. So there's, first of all, the impossibility of maintaining any order. They have a sort of a weird relationship with the Congolese army, this scene that you quote, where they just stood there and watched this shakedown. I mean, these Congolese army taking civilians by the shirt and demanding money so that they could make it to their village. They didn't want to be seen on the camera as disciplining them because they're supposed to be working alongside them. And plus, the peacekeepers themselves have been implicated in sexual exploitation and abuse. Not one has been prosecuted. Many have been accused and expelled from the country. But when they go back to their host country, be it Uruguay or South Africa, nothing happens to them. As indeed nothing happens to any of the rapists, it would seem, who are rampaging in eastern Congo.
That sort of speaks to a sort of a theme that comes out when one of the sort of more interesting, and in my opinion, subjects that you document is sort of the special victims unit of the town of Bukavu. I can't recall her name, but she is sort of the lone policewoman in charge of sort of prosecuting, or not even prosecuting, arresting sort of criminals in sort of this epidemic that you describe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No. What were we going to say?
No, it's just, Major Honorine Munyole. She's my hero. I mean, you see in the film that she literally works out of, it's not much larger than a doghouse. Mm-hmm. A wooden shack with no electricity. She has a staff of one or two. When she takes victims' depositions, for instance, there's no place that she can have confidential conversations with them. When she does take them, somebody has to take the depositions in longhand. She pays her own taxi fare or rides a bike to go to crime scenes. I took her yesterday. She's in town, actually, for the HBO screening. And since I describe her as the one-woman Special Victims Unit, I took her to the Special Victims Unit at the NYPD, and she was gobsmacked at the resources, just overwhelmed by the idea that, that the U.S. government actually pays to have rape kits done or pays for, social services around, a woman's trauma after sexual violence. So, she's got a long way to go before she's any sort of effective law enforcement squad, because she's only one.
I mean, but the region she covers is sort of enormous, population-wise. Not only that, but it's sort of the epicenter of all these rapes, and sort of she's just overwhelmed. But there's one. It's a real heartbreaking scene where you think that. She finds a minor who had been raped, and so the minor agrees to press charges, and the policewoman was able to get the guy arrested, and it was sort of the one sort of bright spot. But then you can probably finish the story.
Well, as so often happens, he was the person they arrested was another officer in the Congolese police, accused of raping this. At the time, she was 15 years old, and she's pregnant by this rape. He was arrested. He was put in jail, but he escaped. And this happens to 99% of the perpetrators who are taken into custody. They either pay a bribe of $1 or $2 and walk free, or they literally walk out the door of the jail because the jails are understaffed. There was an NGO in Bukavu when I was there that was putting locks on the doors of the cell doors in the main jail in Bukavu because there were no locks. So it's a country without infrastructure. It's a country that's just been shattered by so many years of war. There are no roads. There's really no communication system. And there definitely is no criminal justice system.
Well, and that's one thing that comes out. You get the impression, at least I got the impression watching the film, that sort of if only there was accountability, then sort of we would have some sense of justice, and there could be sort of maybe some progress towards peace. Mm-hmm. But what I mean. What are there any sort of one or two sort of big obstacles standing in the way of accountability?
Well, I think that the main obstacle that feeds the perpetuation of this culture of impunity is that there are people very high in the national government who are known rapists, people who have had what they euphemistically call bushwives, which are basically sex slaves. They are in President Kabila's cabinet. They are leaders in the military. And as so often happens when you have crimes of this pervasive nature, the people who get prosecuted are the little grunts, or the foot soldiers. And the implementation of justice against these rapists needs to start at the top. And that means Kabila's buddies, the president's cabinet members, the people he hangs out at the country club with, the heads of all of his, his army and his national police. And is he going to let that happen? I don't think so. And this is where the international justice community has got to step in. We're showing this film in The Hague, in the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
Yeah.
And there are, I have people working in the Congo who have the names, who have the proof, who have the witnesses. To bring some of these guys, in front of the International Criminal Court. If they can't do it in Kinshasa, somebody's got to do it, and it's got to start at the top so that the chain of command is clear.
And the ICC does have indictments, and actually is trying a number of folks from the DRC, but none, as you said, sort of in the government, none part of sort of Kabila's clique. These were, I think, mostly rebels.
They're mostly warlords working in the east, and yes, they are in the docket in the Hague. They are facing charges, but the charges are like conscripting child soldiers, looting civilian populations, blah blah blah. And down at the bottom of this laundry list is rape or sexual enslavement, and it really should be at the top. And that needs to happen.
I guess part of the problem, it would seem, is that it's a lot more difficult to prosecute a rape case than it is to prosecute straight murder trials. That obviously doesn't excuse them, but one of the sort of, I think, more tense scenes in your film is when you go out and find and speak to a group of Congolese soldiers who are admitted rapists. You sort of, it's pretty tense. You sort of travel deep into the bush to interview these gentlemen, and and sort of you ask them, sort of, why did you do this? And their answers, it seems that I expected maybe a bit of bravado. They would brag about it, and that didn't seem to come across. Neither were they particularly sort of sorrowful. Rather, they seemed to it seemed to be just a matter of fact, where, yes, we're at war, so we rape. What's the big deal? And that was just that seemed to be sort of real shocking. How did you sort of find these people? It seems like it was probably dangerous to do so.
It was dangerous up to what I found them actually through a translator who works in the public information office for MONUC, for the peacekeepers, a man who you get to know over the course of the film named Bernard Kalume, who emerges as a big character in the end. And he went to their commanding officers and says, "There's this American journalist here, and she's interested to know if any of your men rape, the women in the bush." And the officer said, "Well, yes. They do, and you ask them. They're free to talk to her about it," which is number one. Like, what? And so about a dozen soldiers came forward, and I'm sure that there were many more. I did give them each $10, but they nevertheless confessed to my camera, and it wasn't like a confession. Like you said, it was so matter of fact. I've been in the bush for a long time. If she says no, I have to use my gun, and if she's strong, I'll bring some friends to help me. We know she's a human being, but if my wife isn't there, then I must take her by force. They consider it their right, and don't consider it wrong at all. And initially going out to shoot with them was scary, because they had their guns, they had their machetes, they were kind of drunk at 10 in the morning. But I realized that they really wanted to be on camera, that they really wanted to be interviewed, and if anything would happen to me or my camera, they wouldn't have their great moment. So at that point I realized I was going to be okay, but it was still profoundly unpleasant.
Well, you put them on the cover here of the film, of the DVD, but like you said, it's just so matter of fact, and you ask them, what if this was your sister or something? You're like, well, it's wartime, that this is what happens. And your interviews with sort of a lot of the victims also, say, this is wartime. This is what happens. Although they're obviously not. It's just sort of disturbing, I guess, and shocking the degree to which it just seems evident to both the perpetrators and the victims that this is war. This is what happens. Mm-hmm. Would you agree? I mean.
Well, yeah, the victims, the women who are raped, they're obviously experiencing the war firsthand, but they're also raped by their neighbors, and they're raped by obviously by the Congolese army, and they're raped by the Congolese National Police. They're raped by peacekeepers. They're raped by rebels from 5 different countries. And it's not so much. I think the soldiers are were more likely to say, oh, it's because of the war that we're being raped, but the women who they don't really have a sense of the war, of the conflict, the way that men do. I think they experience it very, very personally, and in that sudden violence where 7 soldiers burst into your straw hut at 3 a.m. and drag you out into the yard and tie you to a tree and rape you for the next 4 hours with the whole village watching. That is a woman's experience of war. Often their husbands will flee. They know that if they are caught there with their wives, they have 2 choices. One is to run away, and the other is probably to be killed. And if they're not killed, they are forced to watch their wives being debased and destroyed in front of their eyes, so that their psychological destruction is pretty much guaranteed. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it was one of the things that I went out to hear firsthand is how women experience conflict, and it comes very personally, and it comes in the middle of the night, and that's the end of their lives as they know it. Not to say that that all the women become the walking dead. Some of them do make it to hospitals. Some of them can get the very complex surgeries that are required to stitch them back together, and sometimes requiring 2 or 3 years of convalescence and many, many operations. But there are survivors in the film the lucky ones who have made it to some of the NGOs where they can find shelter, find skills training, that are, vibrant, dignified women who want to get on with their lives, who have, still live with the nightmare, but are moving forward. And, I hope that people who watch the film get that sort of takeaway, that the women of the country, as one of the characters says, is the Congo's. They are the Congo's greatest resource, and I think they need to be involved in taking this country back from the brink of disaster, where it's trembling now.
And one sort of phenomenon that you sort of explore too is sort of the children born of these rapes. And you go to sort of a school or a small daycare to film some of the children, and there's again another heart-wrenching scene where a child just explodes into tears when she sees you because she thinks your camera is a gun. What sort of is there sort of enough or anything being done sort of to care for these children as well?
Yeah. Major Moniole is in charge of child protection. There are no orphanages that I know of. They don't have really an adoption system. I've had so many people say to me, these children, most of whom get abandoned by their mothers because their mothers, it's like this is a living, breathing stigma attached to me. So many people have asked me, how do we adopt these children? But it's a horrifying tragedy. And a generation, of kids who've known nothing but war. They've had their whole education disrupted during the violence. They really don't have a village structure, a family structure, and there's a huge problem with street children, with kids living in the streets, particularly in the West, in Kinshasa. They make their ways to the big cities, and you see them at night sleeping 3 or 4 huddled literally in the gutters. Human Rights Watch, in fact, did an incredible study about a year ago on the street kids, particularly in Kinshasa, who have been displaced or abandoned or are orphaned.
There was, probably one of the sort of more wrenching scenes in the film is this. I would recognize it almost as an AA meeting, but it's a meeting of women who had been victims of sexual violence, who sort of tell their stories, and sort of they let you in on that. And was that sort of a cathartic experience for them, would you say?
Well, this is.
Could you describe sort of the scene I'm trying to describe?
Yeah, it's a group called Mothers of the Parish that meets every other Sunday after the church service in their local village. And the day that I happened to be there, I came to the service and I was invited to come and address their biweekly meeting. And oh golly, there were 200 women crammed into this room, and the people were standing outside listening through the doorway and faces pressed against the window. And I don't know how a typical meeting goes on. This is run by this wonderful nun, Sister Clotilde, who says to me that every meeting there are more women. There are women who have just come down from the hills, women who need clothes, who need shelter, who need food for their children. Because when the armies come through and rape them, they take everything, the goats, the cooking pots, every stitch of clothes that they own. So they make their ways down to this church, and often the meetings involve these newly arrived women who are introduced around and tell their stories. In the meeting that I was in, there were sort of veterans, and it started out with this woman who was clearly in her late 60s, early 70s, describing being raped by 7 men, while a 9-year-old boy from the village held her down. And one by one they stood up, talked about being, raped by soldiers when they were coming back from the market. The very soldiers that were supposed to be their brothers, who were supposed to be protecting them. Talked about being raped in the road. Talked about having, 2 and 3-year-old girls raped. And then talked very openly about how this was destroying their society. And yeah, it was very moving, and I think it's mostly in situations like that where you have a room full of raped women that they will talk about it, because there's so much stigma attached. You mentioned earlier about the difficulty of prosecuting rape crimes. It's particularly hard in the Congo because the women won't come forward to say they were raped because the stigma is so humongous. I mean, stigma attaches to rape all over the world, but there, and plus that they face brutal reprisals often if they come out and denounce their attackers. But yeah, that was 3 hours I was in this group, and of course they were talking in Swahili, and I really didn't know what was going on until afterwards. But there was so much passion and rage and sadness in that room that I'll never forget it.
And sort of one of the main characters in your film, the MONUC public affairs official who sort of was your guide of sorts, sort of at the very end of the film, he's sort of translating that for you, and he sort of is almost breaking down watching this. That's a pretty powerful moment, and it just made me sort of think. I mean, how it was an excellent film, but it was difficult to watch in many ways, and I can imagine that was sort of even 100 times, 1,000 times more difficult to make. How sort of psychologically did you sort of deal with this, or do you still deal with this?
Well, I sort of see myself as a medium for these women. So many of them said to me, "We're telling you our stories because we want you to take the stories to the world, to a world that seems pretty much indifferent to their plight." So, yeah. Making the film there was a hard balance to be found about the what sort of stories to put in there. There's a scene, for instance, where a group of women who have escaped the bush where they were being held as sex slaves come together, and one woman stands up and tells this horrifying story. The one detail I'm sure you recall about about being forced to kill their children and then eat those children. So the unspeakable degradations and the cannibalism. I heard the variations on the cannibalism thing a half a dozen times, and where women were, either forced to kill and cook and eat their own children, or find out later that that's what's happened, that that's what they had for dinner last night. So how much of that can you put in there? I mean, I tried to find that balance of darkness and lightness, but I also needed to be honest, to represent what the authentic reality is on the ground. So yeah, it was a tough film to make, but it was fairly quick, actually, from beginning to end. It was about exactly 2 years ago that I was cashing in my frequent flyer tickets, and now 2 years later it's on HBO, and is becoming a really powerful advocacy tool. Because a lot of agencies, woe is me, well, they have these huge reports on what's happening over there, but there's nothing like a woman looking into the camera and saying, describing these atrocities. So that's what has kept me going. It's just
it's a very powerful film, and it's very beautifully made. It will be running on HBO all month.
All month, yes.
All month. To check the listings. I'll actually put a link to the listings up on the site here. Are there any other sort of next steps for the film, for sort of publicity, for anything else?
Yeah, well, it's going to be on HBO on demand for the next year. We have a U.S. distributor. It's going to be on television, hopefully all over the world. We're showing it in the Congo, which will be insane. The Brits are buying time actually on Congolese television, so that'll be incredible. We're sort of doing the International Film Festival circuit, but I'm going to be showing it in The Hague, as I mentioned. I'm showing it to the European Union next week, to the African Union in Kigali. And every day there are more requests. We want to have fundraisers. We want to use this film to bring more attention. So that's what I hope it does. I hope it brings that conflict and these women into some sort of international platform where people will finally pay attention to them.
Well, like I said, it's a tremendous film, and I'm sure it will sort of, spread far and wide. Thank you so much, Lisa. This was great.
It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.